let me know when you guys have got that done. Just while Seb and Tyler are doing that, if you want to go back in a tile view, there's yet another view, what would even be the term, tile that you can make use of. It's our information one. So if you can find the information, it's got the text on it. Mark will also be slowly cycling through just extra bits of information on that slide. So again, it'll be reminders on Jitsi functions. There's also a slide in there about CD Chatter Days. So CD Chatter Days is going to be something we're going to be doing following this town hall. We're going to try and make it a weekly get together online, same format as this, where on a more weekly basis, we can be keeping up with each other in terms of gardening and in terms of questions and answers. There will be a weekly subject and that sort of thing. So if everyone's really keen on getting this stuff going, this gardening and permaculture, that can be kind of a weekly way where we're all getting together and asking questions and just being social and giving tips and, you know, just checking in on each other, seeing how you're doing. Yeah, so if you find the information tile right now, the CD Chatter Days is up there right now. So you'll be able to get information on that from the newsletter at handsongrowing.org. Yeah. So if you want to go back to the main slides, are we recording now, Tyler and Seb?
If I can just speak up, the Dropbox recording isn't working, but Tyler is recording.
Great, perfect. Okay, that's good. So we can get started then. So Mark, next slide, please. So we're just a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement. I'm going to do an overview, just kind of the general situation. So what's changing in the world and why food security is going to is important and is becoming even more important. For the middle section of our talks, we're going to be talking specifically about gardening and permaculture. For those who aren't familiar with the term, you will learn what permaculture means, but in a general sense, it's growing food, urban farming in a sustainable, long-term way. We're going to be giving tips on how to go about doing that, and hopefully instilling a sense of excitement over it. And then finally, we're going to be talking about community building. So I know it's intimidating, the concept of actually getting this stuff rolling in your communities, but it needs to happen. If this stuff is going to be successful, it needs to be happening on an organized community level. And we can absolutely help you do that, not only just today, but please keep in touch with us. We're reachable, we're experts on this stuff, and we're super duper passionate about it. So don't be afraid to keep in touch. And then after our talks are done, we're going to have a question and answer period. Hopefully we'll have around an hour, and we'll finish up at 6 o'clock. So next slide, please. So just want to acknowledge, it's necessary for us to acknowledge that we are occupying Mohkinstsis, unceded homelands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Piikani, Kainai, Siksika, Stoney Nakoda nations comprising the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley clans, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Canada. These lands were stolen through bad faith Treaty 7 negotiations conducted in the midst of genocides that are ongoing to this day. This is now and always will be Turtle Island. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to begin with a general overview here. I'm going to talk a little bit about just kind of the changing situation here and just the reason why food security, urban agriculture, these sort of things are going to be so important. So next slide, please. So it's just a fact of the matter of that the planet is warming. We don't need to just get into discussions of why it's happening. We don't have enough time anyhow, but the fact of the matter is it is warming. The warmest February on record was in 2016. And guess when the second warmest February was? It was 2 months ago. So this is just a fact of the matter, and there are going to be effects of this warming. So included in the effects are going to be declines in soil quality, erosion of said soils, increasing use of crops for fuels instead of food, higher demand for resource-intensive food, longer active seasons for pests and plant diseases. So a rule of thumb there is that animals don't like winter. The shorter the winters are, the easier time a lot of animals are going to have. And these animals include pest animals, plants, diseases, that sort of thing, and as well as food speculation by banks and funds. All of these will result in not only a loss of crops, but the loss of crops will in turn yield food price spikes, such as the one that we had in 2007 and 2008. Not something we're going to want to repeat, but it's pretty much a fact of the matter that they are going to be repeated. So we need to be prepared for that. Furthermore, sea level rise is going to result in more shallow water ecosystems. These shallow water ecosystems are vectors for diseases. They are correlated with increased movement of certain diseases. Proximity between humans and animals is going down due to deforestation and fires. In other words, these are forcing animals to exist in closer and closer proximity to human settlements. More will travel, and again, shorter winters, longer active seasons for species that act as vectors for certain diseases, particularly what are called zoonotic or animal transmitted diseases. So it's yet another unfortunate fact of the matter that COVID is not the first, and it's certainly not going to be the last of these sort of events. And finally, just higher risk of financial loss for folks due to extreme weather events like floods and forest fires. This is just a small subset of what's going to be happening over the next 50, 100 years. It's going to get worse, and we need to be prepared for it. Next slide, please. Already, 1 in 8 households in Canada is food insecure. That's households. So that's 4 million Canadians and about 1.5 million children. And these effects are going to get worse before they get better. So you don't need to worry too much about the slide on the right. This is just a slide showing kind of an increase from 2007, 2008 to 2011, 2012, an increase in food insecurity in Canada. So that was 1.4 million households in 2008 that were food insecure. That jumped to 1.6 million households in 2011, 2012. And that's households. So within those households are multiple people. And just the 3 colors denote the level of food insecurity. So the light pink being marginal food insecurity, what that essentially means is that you're in your immediate future, you are at risk of food insecurity and nutritional insecurity. The middle red one is moderate food insecurity. So what that means is that you are currently struggling with putting food on your plate. You are currently compromising on your nutrition. For example, eating instant ramen and whatnot instead of your veggies. And then the dark red being severe food insecurity. That means that you are possibly going multiple days without eating, and you are most certainly not getting sufficient nutrition. So that's already the situation, not incorporating the effects that I stated above. Next slide, please. But here's the good news. And this is what I know this has started off on a dire note, but actually I think what you'll find overall is that this presentation, this town hall, is going to be one of optimism, because ensuring your food security, ensuring the food security of your community, and in turn your town, your city, your nation, is entirely within our reach. Urban farming is simple, it's enjoyable, it's inexpensive, it's incredibly rewarding. And as we're going to show you, it can be environmentally friendly. So the environmental friendliness is going to come in terms of something called permaculture, which we're going to be talking a lot about today. Planting your own food is physically, nutritionally, and mentally healthy. Taking care of plants is mentally healthy. The nutrition is going to come from the fresh food that you have greater access to now. And it's good exercise. The best exercise you can get is even low-level exercise throughout the day, not just going to the gym once, an hour in the day or something like that, but puttering around your garden all day. That's fantastic exercise. And furthermore, Calgary is in an ideal position to take the lead on these practices, 1, due to climate, and 2, due to available space. What I mean by climate is that we're not going to be getting hit as hard immediately by these warming trends. We're a little bit more north. If anything, things are going to improve slightly for us in terms of potential productivity, just because we happen to be a little bit farther north. Those extreme temperatures aren't going to hit us as closely. Furthermore, Calgary has so much space. These two things, amongst others, put us in a unique position to become world leaders in these regards. Not only in terms of shoring up our own food security, only in terms of us becoming more resilient to these things, but helping others. Because this is going to be an even bigger problem for folks who aren't in Canada. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to move things over to Jade. So Jade is our turbo expert on the history of permaculture, and she's just going to go through a set of best practices that we've learned over the years, give you guys a context for it. So Jade, if you don't mind going ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to start by explaining that permaculture as it's presently practiced has a really strong tie to Bill Mollison and also to ecologists like Aldo Leopold and scientists like Vogt, who were really interested in long-term soil health. And they learned almost everything that they ended up presenting by interacting with indigenous communities that had thousands of years of human environmental interactions that allowed them to code strategies for cultivating food and interacting with ecosystems that were generally pretty optimal and focused on soil health. And so all of the modern permaculture that we see is really traditional indigenous practices being modified in modern context. So it's always good to give credit where it's due. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. When you look at permaculture design, often they talk about food forests or forest gardens that have 7 layers, and that you can account for each of these layers that exist in ecosystems with food-producing plants that are optimally arranged because of their relationships with each other to share nutrients or to redirect pests or other kinds of problems that you might get in growing situations. And indigenous agricultural systems use this kind of canopy garden format and create highly productive spaces. And different regions in North America and in South America have, ancient food forests where this kind of ecological management has been practiced for thousands of years with pretty minimal interruption until you see colonial populations coming in and doing monoculture cultivation with animal traction. So you see the complex of wheat, cattle, grapes, apples, a very specific subset of plants. And those forms of farming and gardening are very destructive and invasive. So when colonial forces came to North America, there were food forests basically covering the entire continent and different kinds. And we're in a really interesting one. The prairie ecosystem was full of bison and edible plants, millions of them. Not entirely by coincidence, it was a carefully managed ecological region where indigenous people did routine controlled burns to limit the number of trees and to replenish the soil with carbon. And so the importing of cattle and them importing different plants that were from Eurasian pasture in their guts has wildly disrupted ecosystems in the Great Plains. And because of this, we've also seen feedlot agriculture expand, which causes us to cultivate more animal food specifically in these monoculture grain contexts. And that causes more fertilizer being used, which results in cyanobacteria blooms and disrupts freshwater habitats and also ocean habitats. It's had a hand in tanking salmon species in the ocean. So it's really just cascading effects that are the negative effects that come from not having this more balanced model to food cultivation with higher variety and more resilience across climate instability, because not all plants have negative reactions to different kind of climatic things. Things that are ruined by hailstorms there might be fruit trees that do better, or there might be other kinds of plants that do better, especially tubers that aren't as vulnerable. So we could actually specifically plant our crops using indigenous strategies and indigenous plants and provide a huge amount of food for ourselves. So go on to the next slide. And one of the companion planting strategies that's used by Indigenous peoples across North America, across Turtle Island, is the Three Sisters: corn, bean, and squash. There are a lot of different kinds of corn, there are a lot of different kinds of beans, and there are a lot of different kinds of squash. So you could do an almost inexhaustible combination of these strategies to produce a huge amount of food for yourself. And it's in a mottled canopy style. You have tall cane-based corn, runner beans, peas, other climbing pulses or legumes can run up the stalk, and they also fix nitrogen and help feed the corn, which are heavy feeders. And then the squash spread out provide a huge amount of ground cover, which keeps moisture and nutrients in the soil. And they all feed and grow together. And so this kind of like canopy style growing creates a huge amount of habitat. It also stops pests from accumulating in the same sort of ways. And in combination, corn, beans, and squash provide most of the amino acids and nutrients necessary for human life. It's actually a very complete nutritional complex. And there's a lot of different ways that you can consume all of these things. Move on to the next slide. Because there are huge varieties of not only corns that, because of their starch content, can be nixtamalized or like in some kind of alkalized solution and then made into more nutritious flours and things like that are used for tortillas or for making cornbread or other things like that. Also, corn mashes are a traditional Indigenous food. There are huge varieties of beans and uses of beans, but also and many different kinds of squash. And you can cook all of these things together, like carving out a pumpkin, filling it with beans and corn and meat if you eat that, and cooking it is fantastic. But you can do other combinations of plants that have these kinds of relationships and have these kinds of different positions in the canopy. So if you move on to the next slide. You can use sunflowers as your cane plant. Instead of corn, you can grow amaranth, which is a highly productive grain. You can grow melons of any variety instead of squash. You can grow peas instead of beans. You can actually even do cucumbers instead of melons or squash if you'd like. Different varieties do better in different ways. So if you'll go on to the next slide. All of these different combinations of plants help feed each other, but they also create habitat and bring in spaces for pollinators. So you can plant flowers with these things. You can grow other tubers like potatoes. And all of these things can be done basically on properties that are post-construction or like post-development. We have really compacted soils that are relatively shallow in urban environments, and it's necessary for us to build up on these spaces. So we can layer any combination of compost, soil, straw, grass clippings, other organic matter, and actually start building up healthy soil in heavily interrupted ecosystems and create spaces where we're not only making large amounts of food, but also encouraging biodiversity, which is one of the biggest benefits of agroforestry and something that is coded in kinship relationships with Indigenous communities. They have a sense of kinship with their environment and the plants that help feed them and the animals that help pollinate. And there's an understanding of all these relationships because of long and careful observation. So we can use these strategies and really help insulate ourselves across changes that are going to be happening in the coming decades. And learning this set of skills and learning about these relationships in plants, between plants, animals, humans, and their bioregions is necessary. And so we should grow as much as we can using these strategies, but also, like, we're in Calgary, we're in the Great Plains. This was an ecological region that wasn't identified heavily with agriculture or horticulture. There was more semi-nomadic pastoralism and movement with bison. And so I just want to share one plant that's especially interesting and relevant for Calgary and other people in the Great Plains. If we could go to the next slide. So this is prairie turnip or breadroot. It's a kind of pea, and its root system as you see, it has a tubery, starchy pouch that can be ground into bread or made into a variety of other foods. These kinds of plants grow extraordinarily well in sandy, rocky, or otherwise low nutrient soils, but they have a relationship with the bison. They really do much better in environments that have bison hooves piercing the soil to aerate it, and bison waste sequestering carbon and reintroducing nutrients and other things to the soil. So there are plants like this that are indigenous to North America that used to cover the Great Plains that are much more rare now than they would have been, simply because we brought in cattle and Eurasian pasture in their guts and have disrupted these ecosystems. So we could intentionally cultivate and reintroduce plants like these that are effective at sequestering carbon and also delicious and grow with minimal effort, and just come to know plants and ecosystems better so that we can adapt in these kinds of ways. So I just wanted to share the breadroot. It's a wonderful plant. And I think that should be my last slide.
Great, thank you so much, Jade. Just to mention really quickly here, if everyone can click the chat button, that's the speech bubble again on the bottom left. Mark has very kindly provided a link related to the Three Sisters method. So that kind of layered method for plants to feed into each other and kind of create this more self-reliant sort of synergy on their own. So that's a great link to follow. So that was Jade's kind of given us an overview and a history. Now we're going to watch Bryson kind of show us how it's done. Sorry, Bryson, can you mute yourself a little bit longer? He echoes for some reason whenever he's unmuted and someone else is talking. We'll just go to the next slide really quickly here. So Bryson is just going to take us through kind of a definition of permaculture, and then what I'll ask everybody to do is go back to tile view. So again, click your 4 squares to go back to tile view, and then if you can find Bryson, you can see his pretty face there. If you're not seeing him, try scrolling up or scrolling down. He might be kind of below the screen. And once everybody finds him, click on his screen and he'll be kind of showing us around his yard and showing us kind of what this stuff looks like in practice. So yeah, go ahead, Bryson.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. Yes, probably. Yes, I'm going to be doing some just quick run-throughs of how I'm going to be applying some of these concepts of permaculture and things toward my garden as a way of kind of illustrating how you or anyone you know, or all of the people you know, I don't know how many friends you have, you should get them all growing things. It's pretty great. But I'm going to be using my garden as kind of a way of illustrating some of these basic concepts. So I'm going to quickly turn my camera view around so you can have a look. Oh, doesn't it look just beautiful? So essentially, Jade did a really good job of covering a lot of the overview of what permaculture is and why it is so beneficial. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the core concepts. I'm going to be referencing a lot of knowledge from a fellow named Toby Hemingway, who wrote a book called Guy's Garden, which is kind of one of the seminal texts on permaculture. So permaculture, just as a basic thing, is called permanent agriculture, or it means permanent agriculture. It's focusing more on creating resilient ecosystems in your gardening. These are some chives that have already started popping up. I just felt like I had to show those off because I'm so proud of my little boys. But anyways, so essentially when we're talking about permaculture, the difference between permaculture and regular traditional gardening is viewing your growing space more as an actual ecosystem, because like everything else on the planet, it's all part of interconnected ecosystems. And while humans are very good at trying to sequester everything into little boxes, nature doesn't really care about that and will do whatever it wants. And rather than fight with nature in order to get a perfect thing out of your garden, you can actually get a better yield by learning the systems in place and how they work. So essentially, yeah. So one of the first things that is important to do when you're applying these principles is to observe the environment you're already in. When I started gardening in this yard about 2 years ago, I had some knowledge of permaculture, but didn't really know how to apply it. I knew a little bit about gardening, and I knew if I put some potatoes in the ground, I'd get some potatoes out of the ground later if I did it right. And of course, because I had that attitude, I ended up fighting with my yard quite a bit. If you look around here, there's a lot of dead plants around already from last year. I'm actually going to be cleaning that up and using it to make compost. But we have some plants here. These stringy dead plants right here are called comfrey. And all in this garden bed, there was a ton of this beautiful plant growing. I did not originally think it was all that beautiful. It was just in the way and very hard to get rid of. But learning how to actually use comfrey and learning what it was, it's actually one of the most valuable plants I've grown here. And that's because what comfrey does is it shoots out a deep, deep taproot. They can sometimes grow about 10 feet deep into the ground, pulling nutrients from far further into the ground than any of my other plants can reach, pulls them back up to the topsoil, and then you can clip from the top of the comfrey, take from that, make compost out of it. You can make compost teas, fertilizers, and revitalize your soil ecosystem with that. And that's actually something that nature just kind of does on its own, which is pretty wonderful. Here's a lovely kale plant. It's not on topic, but it's very lovely that it's survived. It was buried in ice about, 2 days ago, and it's already got some green on it. But where was I? Sorry, I'm very distractible. So yeah, being able to observe your environment and learn what's already growing there and how those things can function, not just what's growing there, but what other environmental factors are in the space you're in. You might notice I got a couple of these lovely apple trees right here growing very close to my yard. And what that does is it not only provides shade, but it provides a windbreak. And if I get an occasional hailstorm, I found that it actually protects the garden quite lovely. It's pretty great. And that actually also plays into more of what Jade was speaking about, having those different layered canopies. So already trying to start a garden here, I'm already building on those concepts because I already have, at the very outset, I have a soil layer that because of where I am close to the river and because of all the comfrey that I've been growing on it is quite healthy. And then I already know I have essentially a top canopy. And so I'm in a place where I'm building in kind of the middle parts. And funny enough, in this space this year, I'm going to actually be growing three sisters, the corn, beans, and squash of a couple different varieties. And this is important because on top of having, like when you're trying to design using principles of permaculture, you want to not just grow one thing for one function, but you want to observe all of the functions you can find in all of your plants. I've got some marigolds here. Everything's very dead, so we'll have to tolerate that. But I actually have some dead marigolds right here, although it looks like there might be some green springing up around them. Marigolds are a great example of a multifunctional thing. Depending on the variety you can get, they're actually edible. But one of the things they're very well known for is that they help keep pests away. Obviously, with my apple tree, I have a lot of squirrels wandering around my yard quite frequently. But having the marigolds planted around, and I'll be planting far more of them, I'm sure, actually helps deter them and keep them away. Things like planting garlic is also a great way to do that because they don't take up a lot of space in your garden. And essentially, being able to view the plants as having all of these multiple functions allows you to kind of embrace, like, rather than growing them for one function, you're actually able to embrace when you have a function that's redundant. So if multiple plants are performing the same function, that actually makes your garden more resilient, because if one crop fails, you'll have, you know, 2 or 3 other crops that'll be able to essentially fill in the gaps. And nature, when you allow it to do its thing, is very good at filling in gaps, actually. Yeah, and then finally, like, one of the main things, which seems pretty self-evident with anyone who wants to garden, but that's to produce a yield. Obviously, if you're trying to get into gardening and growing your own food, that feels pretty self-evident that you would want to do that. But when I talk about producing a yield, that also involves part of that observation of being able to see what else you can be growing, what plants are more resilient, that will produce better yields. Like, everyone wants to grow tomatoes. I know I'm going to be growing tomatoes, but they're obviously not bred to grow in this climate. And so it is a bit of a struggle getting successes out of them year after year, and you obviously have to replant them. Whereas if you were to, say, plant a rhubarb plant, good luck getting it to not produce a yield. I placed a rhubarb crown out here on the side of my yard last year, and it went spectacularly. I don't know if you can see that, these rotting red stalks, but that is from my rhubarb plant, and it was very wonderful. And not only that, but when we're talking about all of these kind of concepts around permaculture, they can apply to growing like a food forest or doing a Three Sisters garden, anything like that. But say you wanted to build raised beds, which we're also going to be doing all along this fence here. You can apply a lot of it to smaller scales like that. Because even if you're growing, say you only have a certain amount of square feet to grow in, you still can apply a lot of these functions depending on how you space your plants and which ones you're growing next to each other. It applies large scale, small scale. If you're wanting to get into growing indoors, you can apply a lot of these concepts. If you want to rearrange your house, you can use the principles of permaculture if you really wanted to. And so all of this is to say that the idea of producing a yield from these techniques, actually all of these ideas, they all tie together because permaculture in general is an observation and an interaction with nature. And so all of these things are kind of interconnected to each other, and being able to observe all of them in minute ways in which everything is kind of connected to each other in nature is kind of the core principle at the very center of all of this. Yeah. But anyways, I hope you've all had a lovely time touring my garden and listening to me ramble about plants and things. But yeah, I look forward to seeing some of the things popping up. Obviously, I saw a couple growing out here, and I hope you all had fun with it. But I'll go back to Alan now and let everyone else continue there. cool talks that probably ramble less.
Thanks a lot, Bryson. That was super fun. Thank you. Kind of comfy in a way too, with the birds chirping and whatnot. That was really nice. We'll move things along here, but once again, just quickly, if folks don't mind clicking the little speech bubble, that's the chat button. We've been answering a couple of questions that I can direct everyone to right now. So someone asked, Bryson mentioned a book. I believe that was indeed Gaia's Garden. So that's one of the best, if not the best, resources for permaculture. And then Bree very kindly provided a few YouTube links. So these are good little videos, kind of providing summaries and a little bit more kind of actionable things you can do to get that ball rolling. So have a look at those in the chat. And yeah, once again, just to reiterate really quickly, I know this is a bit of an information dump, but not only are we going to be available to contact directly, either at Permeate or Hands on Growing, if you have questions in the future that occur to you, we're going to be doing these town halls on a monthly basis. So make sure to sign up on Facebook and whatnot. And furthermore, just to remind people again, we're going to be trying to do those weekly things called CD Chatterdays. They're going to have ideally have a different subject every week, and it's just a way for everybody to kind of get back together on a weekly basis, discuss their progress, socialize. Once again, you'll see the CD Chatterday slide not on the main slides tile, but the information one. So you should be able to see right now information. It's dark with a bit of text. You can go there to get our contact info. But now if we go back, so click on your tile view and we go back to the main slides one, that's the green screen. We're going to move it along to do-it-yourself gardening and lawn conversion with Kyle. So go ahead, Kyle.
Hi there, my name's Kyle, as Alan said. I'm here to talk to you about DIY gardening. And the reason I want to talk about this is because there's kind of a misconception about gardening that it's like an expensive hobby to get into, but I would say that's only like half true. Like you can spend a lot of money on it, but you really don't have to. And also the other way I think that myth is sort of kind of true is that there is sort of a barrier to entry, but I don't think that's necessarily a monetary barrier to entry. It's more of a knowledge and skill set and material barrier to entry. So what I want to do here today is sort of help break down that barrier for you guys if you're just getting started and don't really know what to do. So if we could go on to the next slide. So because of COVID, garden centers are actually having a huge increase in demand. I heard someone say that seeds are the new toilet paper because stores can't keep them in stock. And on the one hand, this is really good because it means lots of people want to garden and take food security into their own hands. But on the other hand, this can make that barrier entry more of a problem if you can't find anything. You can't get soil or anything like that, or it's hard for you to go to the garden center, hardware store, something like that. So I want to give you tools to basically garden with things you already have around the house, basically, because you probably already have a lot of the things you need. And the most important thing is seeds. So let's go to the next slide, please. So if you can't get seeds, there's a good chance you have some of them in your kitchen already. So a very easy example of something that's super easy to save seeds from are tomatoes and peppers. So a lot of people throw out seeds when they're cooking with peppers, for example, but you really shouldn't. It's really easy to save them. All you have to do is take them out of the tomato or pepper, wash them off and let them dry on a piece of paper towel, and they're good to go. They're ready to plant. Another good example are peas and beans. So lots of people have frozen peas in their freezer. All you need to do to make these viable for growing is you just thaw them out and soak them. Same with dried beans. So it's pretty much like you do the same thing as if you were going to cook with them. Instead of after soaking them, instead of cooking with them, you just plant them in the ground, and hopefully some will come up later. And also another example are potatoes. So if you have any potatoes that are going bad or growing eyes, instead of just throwing them away, you can just bury them in the ground and you might get some more in a few months. They probably won't grow as well as proper seed potatoes that are treated the most effective to grow, but you might get something out of it, and it's better than letting them go to waste for sure. So you can go to the next slide. So for me, if you're in a position like I am where you don't really have much space to grow, say you live in an apartment like I do, and you get to grow on just your little balcony. So that makes it kind of a problem to like find places to grow. But one of the things you can do is save a bunch of your food containers, like yogurt containers or margarine or milk jugs, something like that. And you can use those to grow on. And one of the reasons these are great is because they're already food safe. So you don't have to worry about malicious plastics getting into your plants when you're growing them. And another thing I plan to do is I got a bunch of burlap coffee bean sacks. They're these giant bags that are basically like this thick mesh, and they are great for just long planters, basically. And I plan to line my whole balcony with them. And they work great because they drain really well. They're very easily portable. They're biodegradable, so they're super safe. But the one issue with the biodegradable factor is that you have to replace them every year or two because they might start to break down. But you can easily get these from your local coffee shop. Most of them just throw them out. And if you just go up and ask, they'll be happy to give them to you, I guarantee. So the other thing is, if you're lucky enough to have a lawn, you have a house or something like that, I would really encourage people to convert as much of their grass lawn as possible into gardening space. And there's a few different ways you can do this. The most optimal way is to build a garden bed. So all you need to do this is just build a square out of scrap wood and put it on the ground on top of your grass. And then you just start filling it. So what you have to do is you put down a bottom of cardboard, which you have to poke a bunch of holes in for drainage, and then you just cover it in soil. It's really that simple. And I think, as far as I know, one of the Calgary bylaws is if you want to have a garden in your front lawn, they need to be in a raised bed. So if you want a garden in your front lawn, that's the requirement, I guess. But if you're gardening in your backyard and you say don't have scrap wood or anything like that, it's really easy to start garden space just by literally turning over your lawn. You can just dig under your grass about 3 or 4 inches and just flip it over. And you've got immediately some very fertile soil. And one of the reasons this is really important is because there's a bunch of, if you do have a lawn, you basically have a ton of fertile soil just kind of going to waste growing grass, because grass isn't going to feed you unless you have like a goat or something like that, but we can't have those in the city, so you probably don't. I wish I could have a goat, but we can't, unfortunately. So yeah, it's not really useful to have grass lawn because you don't really get anything out of it. And lots of people put tons of effort upkeeping their lawn, fertilizing it and mowing it and stuff. And if you just put in like a little bit more effort, then you get food yield out of it. Basically, you feed yourself and your family and your neighbors, which is much better than just throwing away a bunch of grass every month or so, or every few weeks. But I guess there's one good use of grass clippings, basically, and that's to make compost. So if you want to garden this summer, you should be starting a compost pile of your own right now. I love the city compost program, but right now it might be safer to just make your own and stay at home. And if you want to get compost really quickly, things like grass clippings and like wilted leaf vegetables and stuff like that, they break down really quickly. And if you just put it in a pile and turn it every couple of days, like you just dig it and move it around a bit, you'll have great soil in just a few weeks. So start that as soon as you can, if that's something you want to do. So yeah, and then the other thing is that if you want soil or compost right away, you don't want to put in harder things that take longer to break down, such as like meat scraps or corn cobs or apple cores. Those take a lot longer to break down, so probably keep putting those in your green bin. But anything you think will break down quickly, like make your own pile. All it takes is like a bucket even. Like I have just a little bucket on my balcony that I'm using for compost, and it works fine. It's super easy. It's definitely an essential step to having fertile plants. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you. I hope this helps anyone who's getting into gardening and was kind of intimidated by the barrier entry, but I hope this gives you some tools to deal with that and get going and grow some food for yourself and your family and your neighbors. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And actually, that's a great segue into the next talk, which is going to be Bree talking about vermiculture, vermicomposting, and apiculture. So yeah, Bree, if you don't mind going ahead. Are you still muted, Bree?
Hello. Testing.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, today my name's Bree, and I'm going to be covering apiculture and vermiculture. And so yeah, apiculture means the science and art of fostering and taking care of bees, whether that's bumblebees or honeybees. Vermiculture is using your compost to produce and take care of worms. So we'll move on to the next slide, if that's all right. So yeah, the interesting thing about both bees and worms is, although they seem separate and people often overlook this, is they are both very essential to the growth of pretty much all. Sorry, let me just get this all organized. All plants and all crops that we require to survive. While the bees take part in the reproductive process of plants, the worms make plants strong enough to continue growing and to receive nutrients from the soil. Let me just move on to my next point here, just keeping everything organized. So yeah, what bees do is they create pollen, they collect pollen so that the plants can create seeds to continue growing after, while worms, by moving around in the soil, their specific process, their specific role within their environment helps to to bring nutrients throughout the soil, providing those nutrients to the root systems that our crops grow out of. So let me just go through my notes here. Sorry. So yeah, they're both masters of their environment. They're both biologically adapted to take these roles within their environments and even in our gardens. We might as well be considering our gardens a sort of body of their own, because the roles the various organisms have in them work so symbiotically with one another that they're key to the survival of plant life, and thus all life on Earth, all organisms, through the process of the food chain. So let's see. Okay, so yeah, bees pollinate up to 90% of all leading crop types globally. That's a huge amount of.
Oh, sorry, Bree. I think someone muted us also. You got muted there.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh yeah, sorry. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, so anyways, I'm sorry, what was the last point you had me on? I was talking about how their roles are vital to the survival of all plant life.
Yeah, that bees were the most common pollinators of most of a high percentage
they pollinate up to 90% of all leading crop types globally, which in a lot of ways is helpful for our economy, but it's also very important for our survival. By proxy, they also sustain worms through maintaining plants that circulate nutrients through the soil. When it comes to raising, when it comes to vermicomposting and vermiculture, the worms help to actively break down foods and dead material that can then feed the environment that create these plants to grow. So it's very symbiotic is the point I was trying to make. So it's actually very easy for us to create safe havens for these organisms that help to increase in populations that were often damaged by monoculture and big agriculture, as well as the various pollutants and pesticides we use. We can make up for that in our own backyards, and it's surprisingly easy and very affordable. You can even use some of the stuff you have in your own garage. So I'll start with bumblebees if we want to move to the next slide. So with apiculture, we can create like a safe haven, again, using some of the stuff we might already have. I'm going to be focusing on bumblebees and honeybees. It's often very overlooked, the idea of taking care of bumblebees, because one, they don't produce honey, and two, not a lot of people know that bumblebees are actually the more indigenous species to North America and Canada specifically. Unlike honeybees, bumblebees don't overwinter. Most of the other females and the males that help the queen reproduce end up dying over the winter. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see the process in which bees can, like the bee brood, as they call it, continue and reproduce every year. So when it comes to fall, most of the bees have died out, and the queen is fertilized, but she has to go out by, after hibernating over winter, she has to go out in spring and get all her resources in order to create a new nest. They often nest underground, unlike honeybees who nest in trees, and they often go in places like abandoned mouse holes, underneath sheds, different things like that. And so what we'll be doing is we'll actually be creating boxes for them, so we can help control and make it easier for these bumblebees to reproduce, and thus positively impacts the population numbers. So some of the materials we'll need is a small plastic container or wood container, whatever you prefer, to house the queen bee upon finding her in spring. Then we'll need a larger sized box. As you can see in the images here, they're about 6 inches by 16 inches by 4 inches high, and those will be for when the nest grows. Some beekeepers, they will start the bees in this, but the small plastic containers that we start with are easier for observing the progress of the queen. So along with the containments, you'll need nesting material that will include things like wool or cotton. You'll want organic material. You can use bedding material for like rodents. You can get this stuff at pet stores, like that soft wood mulch. And you can also use shredded up hay as well. These are all just materials that bees can build off of, the queen bee can build off of and build her nest. Okay. Let me just go further in this. So okay, so yeah, what else you'll need is you'll want to acquire some bee pollen. This can actually be acquired from various local producers of honeybees. You can get organic pollen. You'll usually get it in bags. Sometimes it's compacted, sometimes it's frozen. It's important to note the dates that these are on, because a more fresh pollen will increase chances of success with your bee colony. And okay, so yeah, you'll have these materials and you'll drill the box together. You'll want any wood. For the larger box, you'll want wood the size of about 3/4 inches, and you'll put that together, and you'll want to mix the pollen you acquire with with some water. You'll mix enough water, only a little bit of water, and then a lot more pollen, enough to make sort of a dough-like material. That will be some of the material that can help the bee. It's the necessary protein to help the bee lay her eggs and build her nest more. And so with that, you'll put that in the nest, and you'll line the box with nesting material, and you'll also need honey or sugar, because they also need that to eat and thrive. And you'll want to mix that with water. You'll want to create a small cup from the pollen in order to put the syrup mixture in. This will help the bee eat and help them be able to reproduce and lay their eggs more normally. That it's necessary for them to produce larvae. So when you first catch the bee, you'll often find her going through the you'll find her foraging for pollen and nutrients, often in the garden. You might see them flying around looking for places to nest. Bumblebees often nest underground, where honeybees nest in trees. So come March, and like currently as it stands, bumblebees should be starting to find places to nest. You'll want either a nest or a small container. I find the nest works best, or I find the net works best. Sorry, I'm struggling here. And you'll just lay it upon the bee, and you'll pull the net up in order to get the bee to fly up into the nest. You'll put them in the small container that I had mentioned earlier, and you'll have that pollen cup made with the syrup inside of it, so the bee will be able to eat. You'll leave them in there, and you want to leave them in the dark in about room temperature conditions, so like 20-25 degrees. You don't want it too much hotter, because they can be a bit temperature sensitive after that, and you can end up slowing down their productivity if you don't give them that. So yeah. And so you leave them for a few nights in there, and they should start to, after 3 days, you'll want to make sure their food is replenished, and they should start to be laying eggs after about a week or so. You'll want to move them to the bigger nest box that you have created out of wood, and that, again, you'll want to check in every few days just to make sure that their resources are kept up, both their pollen and both the syrup. And it takes a few weeks for them to reproduce. It takes about 3 weeks before the first worker bees start coming out, and the first male bees. But when it gets to that point, it gets faster over time. So keep checking every few days. But once it gets to about 10 bees, the hive is getting more mature. It's getting more mature. You have more, they're not exactly combs as you can see in the image here. They're a bit rounder. And if you want to go to, do we have another slide? No, we don't. Okay, so we'll stay on this one. And yeah, so once it gets to about 10 workers, you'll want to move them to a foraging location, because at first you would have had them maybe in your garage, maybe in somewhere that the temperature is controlled. So you'll be moving them outside at this point. And again, because they are burrowers, you'll want to move the box generally low to the ground. You'll want to keep it away from moisture, and you'll want to make sure they're away from like general traffic and predators. When you get a bee box going, it's really actually quite interesting. You can put a glass lid over the opening of the box, so you can actually observe the beehive growing over time. It's really interesting, and bumblebees are not particularly aggressive animals, so it's easy to go in and like maintain them without much risk. And you might even be able to, if you have kids, you might even be able to let them assist in making some of the bee food, helping the materials and all that, and get it started. So it's really interesting that way. We'll move on to vermiculture. So if you want to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, just to let you know, we're a fair bit over the 10 minutes now. So yeah, if we can just keep it moving, that's okay though. We can get through vermiculture.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. So yeah, vermicomposting, it's a little bit simpler. I'll include some links in the chat afterward. The main functions of worms are decomposers. So they take dead material and they excrete it into things called vermicastings. These vermicastings are full of calcium, potassium, and phosphorus, which is perfect for remediating soil. It's basically creating an organic fertilizer. So in order to start your vermicomposting process, it is good to have actual compost made. You'll want some, getting a bag of soil to help like boost that if you need is also fine. You'll need, you'll want to use red wigglers. So we'll move on to the next slide and we can show the way in which you would begin your composting. So yeah, as you can see, you need a couple bins. These plastic totes seem to work best, especially if you're just working at home. And this is a really easy one to get kids involved with. So you'll drill, ideally you'll drill holes in the top sides of these bins. You'll want both, so that way there's a good amount of oxygen getting in the soil. And if you know anything about composting, it's any kitchen scraps, leaves, and grass clippings are usually what go best. You want to avoid onions and meats and anything overly acidic, especially if you're growing worms in the compost. So yeah, you have a few layers. You want to add a couple blocks underneath so the water that comes from the compost has a place to drain, because earthworms also require oxygen to survive. You want the soil to be about like as moist as a squeezed sponge, kind of like a damp sponge, so that way there's a good mix of humidity to oxygen. And so worms can actually compost a huge amount of, like they can compost a huge amount of material. About I believe it's like 18 tons. They can do up to 18 tons. It's really amazing how much worms can do. So in order to make sure your vermicomposting setup is successful, you'll want to make sure your kitchen scraps are chopped up. Feel free to go in and turn the compost over time, and you'll have the bin stacked. So you want your worms in the center composting bin with your kitchen scraps, with the soil, and over time they'll eat those bits and they'll move up into your next bin, which at first only has just the same kind of setup. You've got the organics and you've got the soil, but they'll move up to acquire more food, leaving behind those vermicastings. And that's exactly what you want for your soil. So once you have that finished compost, which it takes about 3 to 6 months, it takes some time, but once you're there, it won't feel like very long at all. You can use that to both make compost and make fertilizing tea. So for worm tea, all you have to do is take some distilled water. So that's water left overnight. So like you can use tap water. You just want to let that chlorine evaporate. You soak the vermicastings in that, and you can use both the liquid and the leftover castings to remediate any soil. If you have soil that's too clay-like, it's too dense, that can make it very hard to grow nitrogen-needing plants and everything like that. So you can put those vermicastings in that soil, and as well as overly dry soil, you can loosen that up and balance that soil so you can start successfully harnessing a garden. And so, yeah, by using both bees and worms, you can create a garden that almost maintains itself by providing the right nutrients to the soil and allowing bees to create fertile plants that can continue growing every year. All right, so I basically covered as much as I could for vermicomposting and apiculture. I'll include those links in the chat. And I guess, yeah, we can move on to community building and the necessity of that. Thank you for giving me my time and everything. Sorry for the wait. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Bree. Okay, yeah, let's move right along here. So we're very lucky to have Sarah, who has decades of experience in organizing people at the community level towards these sort of things. I just want to stress once again the. Sorry, I think Bree, are you still unmuted?
You're unmuted.
I'm muted now.
Okay. There, that sounds good. This is all well and good to assure our own food safety and to protect ourselves from the upcoming situation. But what's really going to need to happen for all of this to truly work at a society level to guarantee the food security of our neighbors and the most desperate amongst us is for this to start happening at a community level. So what I hope we're going to do today is not only energize you guys and teach you guys how to do this stuff at your own local level, but to energize your community and your friends to start spreading this. Canada as a whole can become a world leader with regards to food security, and it needs to happen because, you know, even if we're going to be minorly unsafe, there are going to be a lot of people who are quite severely food unsafe, and that's completely unacceptable. So I'd like to welcome Sarah. Sarah, if you're here, you can go ahead and start speaking, please.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you again. I miss you, even if I left Permeate.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. I'll just interrupt really quickly. If everybody can go back to tile view, they can see Sarah's lovely face in her tile as well. Sarah doesn't have slides, so we're just going to be listening to her directly. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was saying that I'm so glad to be able to be connected to the people from Permeate. Because I got to know you, not quite well, but you know, to become very fond of you. I think that you are very honest people, very sincere people, and you are trying to do your best in order to do things that could be help to live in a better society. You also know that I always had a different kind of analysis or answer for different things that we used to talk about, that it was on the other side of what you were believing that things could be done. And that's okay. That's okay. For one reason or another, you know, I left the group because I want you to have your own experiences. Unfortunately, what happened in the last months is bringing very openly the consequences that we will have to face in the future and in the very moment too. And I think that everybody is seeing the consequences more or less, but not only here in the province, not in the country, in the whole world. And even here in Canada, the media still controls the information that usually you should have of what is going on all around the world. The situation is much more dramatic and terrible if you would know what's going on in other countries. It will make you crazy. And one of the things that the media and everybody is trying to do with the Canadian people is that people doesn't get too much stressed out with that, because what we have already here, we have enough to be more depressed than what everybody is depressed already. But coming back a little bit about what I have to talk about my experience and the need of community organization. Community organization can be taught under different kind of analysis. And the way that you are thinking and talking about community organization respond to one kind of analysis that probably you even don't know that you are doing that analysis, but respond to one kind of analysis. The way that I see community organizing and community organizations comes from a completely different kind of analysis of what you do. Yours is very personal, very understandable in terms of two things. In the last three exponents that were talking before, Jade was talking about the causes or the needs that we have about getting organized around gardens, because we are having to have food insecurity. We have been having, I mean, the world, the complete world, hundreds of millions of people already for years have been going under food insecurity, but it hasn't been touching you, so it didn't matter. But the whole world now, even here in this city, there is so much food insecurity. So what you are thinking to do, of course, is very relevant now. And then you talk about food insecurity. And then you talk about why you are going to have food insecurity. You are going to have food insecurity because of climate change. And you get up to there. That's all what you talk. And then you talk about solutions. You don't talk about why do we have climate change? That, you know, science have been telling us a long time that it goes in not circles, but it happened on and on history, but have to happen after hundreds of years. And because I am so old, I can remember 60 years ago, what's the name of this Canadian, Japanese person? Suzuki. Suzuki, when he was very young, he already was talking about how they were noticing climate change, but it will go very far away. And if we did the things that we have to do, you know, we could avoid to have it in several hundreds of years. But what happened there, we are talking about food insecurity, and it is related to climate change. And both things, you forget about the causes, the economical and political causes that have been taking the situation to the point that we have now. The earth is drying. We have been killing nature. We have been having huge damage in the lungs of the earth. Just remember, probably everybody forgot about what happened in the Amazonia not long ago, because we go from one thing to another. So we forget about the last one. But you know, the Amazonia, that it was a huge lung of the earth. It had been destroyed in a big amount, in big part, by the fire, climate change. And on the other hand, by the voracity of the corporations that are so happy because the fire happened, because they are going to use that land to produce and make money, not for the benefit of the people, for the benefit of their pockets. And so you're missing there in your analysis the causes. You say food insecurity, climate change. And you miss completely the political and economical analysis. That is economical, because economical drives the kind of politics that we are going to have. Exactly like that. Not political to economical, economical to political. And then who pay the consequences of that? The social, means the people that is in need. So I'm so sorry that you as a group that should be an educated group and that should have the possibilities to have a more complete analysis, you are not doing that. Yeah, my husband is telling me that I have only 2 more minutes. Then I think that it was a good talk, because the things that were said are very relevant, but you are missing the most important thing, why you are organizing. And then Brian also brought a point that Oscar make me notice. He said, we are accustomed to put everything in niches. So when he was going through the soil, he said, nature doesn't do that. Nature connects anything. And that is the reason of permaculture. It's so real. And you can apply that exactly into the social structures. You know, he said, we don't have to contradict the nature. We don't contradict nature. And that is so important. And permaculture does that. And in the case of organizing community or the society, we contradict all the laws and the ways that community should be organized. So when Jay talked about indigenous practice, about that we're not basing money in contradiction with corporation production to feed us, with all the lacks in terms of healthy nutrition and normal nutrition for us, you know, one is contradicted the laws of society, and the other one is doing things, cultivating the land accordingly the laws of the nature. So everybody has been bringing points here that has to do with the kind of community organization that you have to have, that you should privilege. And so again, we understand that the kind of agriculture that we have all around the world contradicts the laws of the nature, but also this economical, political, and social organization contradicts the laws of how communities and society should be working on or dealing with, you know. So I think I don't have time now to talk about my experiences, but I think everybody has been hearing a little bit about the things that I've been doing along my life in terms of organizing. The only difference is that I always thought when I have to help people to get organized is that has to be in relation of an analysis of the economical, political situation of the world where we live. And that gave me the way that I have to organize people, giving them power not only to grow their own food, but power to change from the mentality that the system had been imposing in here. You know, making our capacity to think, to have our own analysis, almost none. And only believing what they will say through the press, through the television, or through any means that they want to let us know how things happen. And what are how things happen. But we cannot have an analysis. And if we have a different analysis, then you are radical. And if you are a radical, from a little bit, you will be a terrorist. And that's the whole. It's very simple to understand. But it's difficult for us to assume all those things and to do everything that we have to do under those understandings. I think I went already with more than my 10 minutes, but I wish I could have more time. And sometimes I wish I could go to Permeate again and be able to participate with you in so many things to make you understand. Don't choose the wrong road. Not now. Not now. We are in difficult times today. And if you are going to let the system to continue and to kill us at the end of the, well, we all will pay the consequences because the poor people are paying the consequence already for a long time. But you that never have been poor, you will know what it is. Thank you so much. I love you guys.
Love you too, Sarah. I want to give you, since I'm leading this damn thing, and I want to give you a little bit more time, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Sarah, just for everybody here who's listening, what would you want to see Calgary doing? All of us here, what would you want to see Calgary doing over the next 5 or 10 years? Ideally, what would you most preferably want to see starting to happen in the short term? I'll happily give you another 5 minutes.
Politically, educate yourself. Learn to have an analysis without what the press and the media is telling you. Just that. And then you will know what to do and how to do things with all the knowledge that you have. You will know where to start, with whom you start. Why it is important a community organization? Just to solve problem of food insecurity, or to give power, political power to people? And how do you bring into them again a different kind of relationship among themselves? Not contradict. As you don't contradict nature, you don't want to contradict nature now, don't contradict the laws that the native people know really well about how do we live in community and survive, all with the same opportunities. And that's what you do when you go to organize communities. Now, if you're going to go and organize people in areas where they have a quite easy social economical situation, I'm talking about middle class, don't feel touched, because it is not in an offensive way that I say, but you have what now a huge majority, not the same kind of majority that we have 2 months ago. It's huge. Now it's many more people. They don't have possibilities economically or anything. And they are desperate for people to go back to work, because the people with the money, the corporations or whoever has the business, doesn't make the money because they have a social or they have the business. It's because of the people that works there for low salaries, for bad conditions, for no benefits. We are the ones that move the production of the money. So when we go, first we have to educate politically, and at the same time to do things that help us to learn how do we relate to each other in a human way. How do we help each other? If you go to work in a block, you are going to talk about how do you do gardens. Not everybody in their own garden. You have people giving you the land in their backyards, and you put the children, the old people, and everybody to work in that land and decide, this is what we are going to do in this garden, just potatoes, because we have to feed the block, even if they don't put work on the money. When I saw sometimes, I was reading again, what are the goals of hands-on drawing, and the last one says, how you help people to have their gardens in the community, and finally, how are you going to sell those products? At the end, what is the main objective? How do you make business? How do you make business? And to make business, to make money. So I don't have the time to make all the relation. I hope that if you have if you really want me, I can continue. But this is a long talk. I did this in Chile and I did it in Mexico among the poorest people, because they learn quite quick to understand how they can exercise their power, not just for food, to end the oppression that they have from the oppressors. Because then we are going to be, everybody around the world, having a more equal rights, equal life, equal everything. Meanwhile, we have this kind of economical political system, forget it. Maybe you middle class will be able to deal in between and have a more easy life. What you are having now. Not everybody, because I know that in Permeate there is people that doesn't have the resources, and you are very solidarian with them. But we cannot live on solidarity like that becomes to be a kind of charity. We need to provide same opportunities for everybody, So I love you guys. I'm here. I didn't want to come back again to talk to you people from Permeate, because I decided at that time that you have to walk the road that you are choosing. I think that is a wrong road. Really. It will take you maybe to have some kind of, personal, personal experience, and be happy, and to help a group of people that really doesn't need so much to have that. Yeah, it will be like a hobby, and also because of that hobby, they will be able to learn to feed themselves, what is very good. It's not bad, but there is much more behind that has to be done.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and we love you too, obviously. It's just such an honor to have you, and I look forward to continuing to. We look forward to continuing to chat with you in the future and hear your ideas. It's just such an honor for us to have you. So thank you. Okay, if everybody can go back to tile view. Oh, I guess now we've just got our questions and comments slide. So sorry we couldn't provide people a little bit more time for questions and comments. But if anyone would like to just make use of the raise hand button at the bottom left, that's the little hand with the palm out. You can go ahead, raise your hand, and we can field any questions or comments you have. If not, I think a few questions were asked previously in chat that we can get everybody on board with, but I think they were all kind of semi-answered in chat. So I'd like to prioritize anybody that saved their questions for this period. Yeah, Uali, O-U-A-L-I-E, just asks, any other tips for apartment growing, especially when deeper soil is hard? Is there anyone here, maybe Bryson or whatnot, can field that? Yeah, Bryson, go ahead.
So in terms of apartment growing, obviously your biggest challenges, like you were saying, have to do with not being able to have the same depth of soil, but also your access to sunlight can be limited. And so obviously you're not going to grow like a 10-foot tall tomato plant on your apartment. I mean, maybe you could. I don't know what your apartment's like. But in terms of what you can do for acquiring, let me gather that thought before I just barf out words. So one of the things that I think you can do, obviously you're going to be growing in containers. One thing we're going to be trying on a few different apartments is going to be growing out of burlap sacks. You can get them in relative abundance for very low cost, and they provide a bunch of functions. Mainly they can hold quite a bit of soil, enough for the root base of larger plants. Like you can grow like potatoes, things like that out of them, which most people don't think of when they think apartment gardening. Like a lot of people, when they grow on their balcony, they're thinking about like growing like herbs or maybe some leafy greens, which are great things to grow, and you absolutely should because they produce really quickly. But there are strategies you can take, things like the burlap sacks, or heck, if you find an old metal garbage can, why not fill that with soil? But I'm not sure if that answers the question, but yeah, there's a lot you can do potentially to maximize that space. And yeah, just the strategies around plant selection.
Yeah, it sounds like Wally is satisfied. That does sort of connect to another question that got asked in chat earlier, and I'm not sure how adequately it was answered in chat. Maybe we can just reinvestigate it real quick. Gin-N-K asked, I'm hoping to start a balcony garden for the first time this year and have no knowledge. Probably related to your answer already, Bryson, but like balconies, do you have any particular thoughts on that, or anybody else?
I'll let Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle, man.
Yeah, so a lot of what it comes down to, I think, is just plant selection. So like Bryson mentioned, leafy greens do really great. In my situation, my balcony gets like maybe 2 or 3 hours of direct sunlight in the mornings, and that's like it. So what I plan to do is just grow a lot of spinach, because I love spinach, and it grows really easy. It actually prefers the low light, and it also doesn't need like deep soil. Its roots are actually pretty shallow. But yeah, a big part of it comes down to choosing the right plants. So another thing I plan to grow is just a lot of peas and beans, because those can sort of do well under low light. So yeah, it's really as simple as just like going on Google and like look out on your balcony and see, like, kind of figure out what the conditions are, like what the light's like, how much space you have, and just like Google plants that are like, in my case, like just low light plants, and then just pick from that list and just focus on those things. So like kind of narrow your selection of plants really is the best way to go about it.
Great, thanks, Kyle. So I've got someone, person who is just a period as your name. I do see your hand up. Bryson, I'll let you follow up real quick there. Bryson, you're still muted.
Oh, hello. I am audible. Yeah, just as a follow-up, I guess a couple things. If you're thinking of plants that don't take up a lot of space, things like radishes and beets are also good. But more important for that, one of the best things you can do to get started is to not get started by yourself. Obviously, Permeate is all about community gardening, but like if you know you have friends who are also interested in getting started, being able to work on these kind of things together is an incredibly great way to reduce that barrier. You can share in your failures and successes, and you can share your food with each other, which is important. And that kind of speaks to what Sarah was saying about food security and how we focus on it. It's important to be able to feed yourself, but it also is about learning how to provide for your community. Because I think a lot of gardeners kind of get into a certain kind of survival mindset where they're doing this to protect themselves, but it is a much better approach to all of this to be approaching it from the aspect of bringing people in, getting together with people you care about, or talking to your neighbors, things like that, so that you're not just providing a single function, but you're feeding kind of like with the permaculture approach, you're feeding into a wider ecosystem.
Yeah, so that is Sarah, who is the period now. So Sarah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, last year I grew in my balcony. I grew all the lettuces that I had to use in the summer. I grew quite a bit of tomatoes that also I could use in the summer. My herbal plants, and beans. Yeah, we really enjoy the beans. And as somebody else said, probably I didn't do peas, but I wanted to do peas. So you on and on can have things that you don't need to buy in the grocery store. Yeah, but a good experience. It was the first time that I have to grow things in my balcony. Yeah, and the lettuces, they grow so close to each other, and you don't take a whole lettuce, so you start to take the side leaves, so you let them grow, so you never end with one lettuce at a time, so you keep letting them grow. Yeah, and that's good. That's all what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Sarah. Jade, go ahead.
If people want to see the grow setup that I have, should I show people plants real quick?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll take you over here. So all of the things that I grow inside are on plastic shelves that cost very little money or have been salvaged.
So just as usual, people can click the 4 squares to go into tile view. And then if you see Jade, she's on video now, you can click on her.
Yeah. So there are lights here, but there are also a large number of plants. These plastic trays were from a restaurant that shut down. They're busing trays, and they cost $1 a piece. I'm sure we could reach out to restaurants around us and see if there are any other things like that. But you can grow a huge amount of things in them. Those work really well in balconies, and these kinds of shelves are inexpensive, but IKEA has some that are like $16 and metal and small. It's easy to build shelves. I think you can make them out of scrap really easily. And I think working with scrap is always one of the best things to do. Another thing you can do is just take a bag of soil that's full and take scissors along, leaving a bit of a lip, and just cut a hole on the top, and then you have a raised bed. So they're very easy, low cost, low tech solutions for starting things like greens. Beans, like Sarah's totally right, peas do really well, but any leafy vegetable that'll get you nutrients, it's even herbs and things like that, sorrel, cilantro, rosemary, sage, all of those leafy greens are really important for keeping you healthy. And you can grow them in large quantities for your community. But all of these plants that are on the shelves are going to go into our garden beds, into our communities. So lots of plants like tomatoes, peppers, there's field peas and things for greens, like growing lettuce and beets, onions, and starts. We're going to do a lot more direct growing when it's warmer. So if you want any suggestions for plants or things like that, I think it's always good to find things that are specifically situated for your local environment, that have short seasons and are pretty resilient to changes in weather. And like that's what we're growing all here. Everything is kind of like ideally situated for our really weird weather.
Thanks so much, Jade. Yeah, and just in that little amount of space, like Jade is growing an incredible amount of food. Like the amount of edible food that you can put out with very little effort, very little space is you're going to be super impressed. Like if you try this, no, I should say when you try this, because we're all going to try this as soon as we hang up. You're going to be surprised just what an incredible amount of production you're capable of. Anybody else? We had Seb ask in chat earlier, and again, I'm not quite sure how well it was answered. But Seb brought up a point I think a lot of people end up thinking about when they think about composting, was how do you stop compost from stinking? Does anyone want to address that really quick? Tyler?
Sure, I'll pop in here. Basically, the main idea is to go out and no one else is getting feedback, right? Okay.
Nope,
You
no
want
feedback.
to keep carbon levels high and nitrogen levels low. What that generally means is you want to have paper, you want to have dry or dead leaves from the garden, grass clippings. These things are high in carbon. They're going to help produce essentially the nicer smelling aerobic decomposition. And if you have a lot of meat, this can, and if things get too wet, this can create anaerobic digestion and also just more byproducts. So just mostly just avoid meat. And if things get too wet, just turn. If things start to smell bad, just turn your compost, and that should help reduce smell quite a bit.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I've talked to a few people now who are kind of there's the ick factor of composting. So thanks for addressing that. Yeah, you can definitely do it in such a way that that isn't nearly as smelly as you think. Just in chat right now, SB says, a friend of mine suggested taking cheap LED light bulbs, taking out the translucent plastic diffusing cover to focus the light better as an alternative to expensive grow lights for indoor gardening. Is this recommended? Does anybody have any knowledge about that?
As long as you're leaving some kind of cover that protects the lighting from the humidity, because plants respirate, right? Like there's a release of moisture, and then you're also watering them, and like, so you often can get condensation in indoor grow situations. As long as you have some kind of cover protecting the circuitry so that it doesn't like corrode or have other problems with connectivity, then it should be fine. But yeah, I mean, most grow lights tend to have pretty minimal covers, like not a secondary larger cover. But I mean, I think you'd be surprised at how much you can grow even with not really high quality lights, especially leafy plants. Things like that, chives, onions, other things, like they don't really require that much to at least get to like a green shoot that's edible. So you can do a lot of indoor growing without having to have even very fancy lights. But if you're trying to grow things like peppers or tomatoes indoors, that's a lot more difficult. And actually, Nolan was in the chat. I don't know if he's still here, but Nolan knows a lot about that kind of like indoor growing. But it's much more intensive and not necessarily as necessary for like nutrient production.
Sorry, we got someone I think is unmuted. I heard something there. Okay, well, I think that's dealt with. Sorry, SB, is that you, Seb? I'm not meaning to be impersonal. I keep forgetting what people refer to themselves as. Another earlier comment we had. Let me see. Okay, yeah, sorry about that, Seb. I wasn't meaning to be impersonal there. Another earlier comment we had, someone just calling themselves G. I've heard a local community worm farmer leachate, the liquid that drains out of the bottom holes of a worm bin, and worm tea are two different things. She does not recommend using leachate as a fertilizer. On the other hand, worm tea combines water and finished worm castings, often applying an aquarium bubbler to create a lovely liquid fertilizer. Did anyone have a comment on that? I didn't check whether that got addressed in chat or not. Yeah, thanks, GS. Had a lot of fun. Thanks for coming. Hopefully that question got answered. G, if you didn't get an answer, definitely reach out to us. We do have a wider group of knowledgeable folks that weren't necessarily able to attend this one. So if you're still desiring an answer on that, don't be afraid to reach out. Paris just asked, can we throw paper towels in our compost? The city I'm at currently doesn't accept paper towels in the green bin anymore. Are paper towels acceptable for composting?
They take a really long time to break down. It's better just to use reusable cloths and to avoid paper towels as much as you can. I just think that it takes significantly less effort to maintain, and then it's easier to keep just a bucket for vegetable waste. And like I have a worm box, so I just throw a lot of my compost right into there, especially like apple cores and parts of vegetables and things like that. I think that's like an easier system in general. But because it takes pretty intensive machinery to like heat process and accelerate decomposition of finished processed cellulose like that.
Thanks, Jade. Any other questions, comments, input? Was there anything anybody liked in particular or thought could be improved? Okay, well, just as a reminder, I did get a notification here. Someone asked, how can we rebuild a robust movement using both disruptive and constructive programs? Jade, I know you've been answering a few questions already, but I feel like you would be well equipped to answer that. Did you want to comment?
Fine. I think Sarah pointed it out. Is like, yes, we have to take care of ourselves by providing our own food, and it's important to decouple ourselves from capital that way. But the moral reason that we do that is because this current food system eats the lives of people in other parts of the world. It displaces a huge amount of suffering and indentured servitude, basically. And it basically just amounts to extracting the life and well-being of other people. So, I mean, disrupting food systems and disrupting supply chains isn't and means like it's not an end in itself. We have to use these kind of stabilizing programs to radically reshape society so that we actually are taking care of people. It's really obvious that like governments have done the math on what our lives are worth and what the environment is worth to them. And obviously I have a lot more respect for human life and biodiversity than anyone that's in an elected position in the state now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want us to be really honest about the fact that like the end goal of all of this is to have a completely differently structured society that centers and prioritizes life and nourishes relationships with children and the elderly and isn't focused on profit and production. And I think that the faster that we transition from the system that we have now that wastes food and wastes human life and effort to a system that really prioritizes the efficient use of people's time, energy, and their mental health and well-being. I think that like, we need to disrupt a lot of programs and systems that lead to very unhealthy people and very unsafe environments for good people. So I think that in the context of COVID, it's more important than ever that we advocate for housing for people that are inappropriately homed or don't have places to stay. We have to stop focusing on profit and actually start focusing on making sure that people are taken care of and alive. And so that just centering an ethic of life is really, it's incredibly disruptive to the political system as it presently exists.
Sarah, go ahead, and I think this will be a good note to end off on.
Okay, so when I propose here in Calgary to work in the communities, of course, it's so important to talk about growing our own food, but also as important is to not to put things in niches and do everything connected. You connected, let's say, clothing. How do you start to learn to make your own clothing? How do you take old clothing and transform them? How do you knit your mittens for winter, your hats for winter, and you put people, to men and women and children that will be finding attractive to do those things and to use them? How do we start to in the emergency room in normal times. I mean, for things that are not important that you can prevent at home with natural medicine. The natural and allopathic medicine have to go together. So when you work in a block, you work along those things. How do you use your own system of taking care of your children? I did that in Mexico and in Chile, or what I am telling you. How do you avoid to send children into daycare? And then how do you teach help them to have the courses to have a home care? So when a person in the block goes to work, he doesn't take the children in a bus to go far away where somebody is going to take and use an extra half an hour or more before getting to work with the children, as I see them in the morning, early in the morning in winter time with those kids. You just go to one of your neighbors, if you have one or two women that will do home care, and then the money will go to them. You will provide money to people in your block. How do you work exchanging services of fixing whatever you have to fix that somebody will know, and you exchange it for food? I will make food for you and your family for 2 days. You fix my washing machine. And so many other areas where you can work, how we're going to look after our old people in our block. How we're going to be sure that they are well fed. How maybe they will lend you the land to have gardens, and the rest of the people, some people in the block will cultivate that, and they will benefit. How many people are going to have bees in that? How many people are going to have chicken and have their own eggs and share with everybody? At the end, maybe everybody can have their chickens there and enjoy eggs. So with all those things, you start to create a different kind of relationship. And you can invent or find need. The people is so creative. You will not believe it, but you will not have to come with all the ideas. They will come. And then when they cannot do things, they will ask, let's say, in this case, because I've been working in poor areas, and whenever somebody have a problem, they go to the social worker. So the social worker doesn't solve the problem. They tell them, well, you have to go to this agency. This agency will solve your problem. And then you go individually to look after your own situation. And then when you get to the agency, they will tell you, well, we cannot do that, but maybe that other agency will do it. So you start to go like crazy from here to there. Finally, you don't get any solution. So when you are in a block and you find, and you are all organized, and you find that you cannot do something that will benefit or affect one person, you will go as a block, representing everybody from the block to the city hall, to wherever they have the possibility to solve that problem that they are not able to solve. So you make pressure as a group with power that will be behind the person or the people that are having the problem. And then you will have a completely different answer. And if you have at the end more blocks organized, then you have the power of the people from other blocks helping each other. So it's not one person going to talk or writing to your MLA or your representative to say, this is my problem. Fuck off, they will say. I'm sorry, my language. Yeah, but that's it. They will not say that, but it's the same. And that's my experience in the community. Now, there is another thing that is different from the agencies or the organizations that are starting the community and start to teach people about things. Like the Alex Community Food Center, they have an extraordinary woman starting the whole program of growing vegetables around. if you go to the Alex Community Food Center, it's beautiful the way that had been happening. And there is so many people coming for lunch, for dinner, or people that are sometimes or more of the time in need, and they see and they see. But they get to their blocks and they are also isolated. They cannot communicate with anybody because that's what happened in the communities. And then they are not able to reproduce the same experience. So they learn, but they are not able to repeat the experience in the block. But if you have the block, and then the other thing, when you have this organization that teaches you so many things, people doesn't have the capacity to reproduce those good experiences that will help them in their own places where they are living. And what's the problem there is that the people that fund these organizations to teach people to do things different as you are planning to do it, they don't get out from their four walls. They are not allowed to go into the community and help people to reproduce those programs. Why? Because the people, the big corporations that fund the salaries and everything that is being done in those under those four walls don't allow to do that because they don't want people to learn. That's reality. And that happens in reality too. So, community organization is just like in nature. Everything has to be linked. And you have to give power. Not give, you don't give power. You have to teach people that they have power. Like I was talking at some point with somebody, and the person said, you have to teach people how can they have more power. Yeah, that is interesting. Do we need to have power within the system? Because the system, if it's going to try to make us have the less power that we can, they don't like us to have power. They like us to be democratic, to elect one person representing hundreds of people to talk for us, for everybody's problem. It doesn't work.
No.
But it benefits the system.
Sorry, Sarah. It's 5 after. Sorry to interrupt. I did promise everybody we would be out by 6. Absolutely wonderful thoughts, Sarah. Completely agree. We are being taught right now, due to world circumstances, that it's just an unfortunate fact that we can't rely on our current system to assure our food security and the food security of those of us who are most in need of it. So I hope everybody enjoyed themselves today. I hope you're not only energized to begin your own projects, to begin showing up your food security within your own household, your own community. But I hope that eventually, if we keep doing this, we keep chatting with each other, we keep making use of Calgary's privileges and space and forward momentum, Calgary can truly be a role model with regards to everything that we discussed today. So once again, these town halls are going to keep happening, ideally once a month. And then we're going to be doing our weekly CD Chatter days as well. Again, if you go into tile view, one of the tiles that you can see is information. Those set of slides will tell you about those programs as well. Let's keep at this. Let's keep chatting about this. Let's keep energizing ourselves. Let's keep helping ourselves. Let's keep skill sharing and information sharing. There is no better time than now. You have no excuse. We're sitting at home bored. We have the capability, we have the time, and I hope after this and future events, we will have the enthusiasm. So thank you so much to everybody who came out. I had a lot of fun. Some wonderful talks and subjects were covered. Follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our newsletter. I hope my chat moderators can make those available in chat maybe one more time. And keep in touch. If there were any questions you forgot about, we can answer those. I'm sure they can get answered, if not directly, then at future town halls and CD Chatter days. So let's keep this going, guys. I mean this, truly. Let's ride this momentum. Calgary can be a role model. These things are achievable, and they need to happen, because we just can't rely. We've been learning now. If anyone has been reading the newspaper lately, we've been learning we can't rely on the system anymore to help us. And that's not a partisan comment. I'm not attacking any one party in particular. We can't rely on Kenny. We can't rely on Trudeau. We can't rely on anybody except ourselves. So I hope everybody can use these thoughts for some forward momentum here, and let's make some really positive, rewarding, helpful changes. So thank you very, very much, everybody. It was such an honor to have all of you. I had a great time. So have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll stay in touch.